Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. My guest today is Richard Lewis. We talk about how he first got into technology, his time as a developer advocate, and his transition into being a DevOps engineer. I hope you enjoy.
Great. Well, hello, Richard. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks so much for being on the show. My guest today is Richard Lewis, currently a DevOps consultant at 3Cloud. Previously worked at Coyote Logistics for a number of years and a whole slew of different roles, including a developer advocacy role. And then you've been in the IT world for many years.
Yes, sir.
Did I miss anything?
Yeah. No, that's pretty much it. 3 companies. Let's see, Sears, Coyote, and now 3Cloud. So
there you go.
Well, threes, right?
Two Chicagoland staples, right? Sears and Coyote. Could you share a little bit about 3Cloud for people who aren't familiar with them?
Yeah. So 3Cloud's definitely a Chicago company. Started here. Started by 2 gentlemen who worked for Microsoft, and realized that the opportunity was there to grow the professional services business around Azure and just tailoring to clients who were adopting to Azure or, running into conflicts with Azure. And they just built the whole business around that. Started about 5 years ago. I joined them last year. I was employee number 70-ish. Mm-hmm. Right now we're sitting at about 340 employees, about a year and a half later.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, growth. It's been pretty interesting and exciting at the same time. A lot of companies came to Azure during the pandemic.
Sure. It's interesting. I feel like we don't have to talk about this too much, but when I was recruiting in the DevOps space years and years ago, I felt like AWS kind of had that first almost like sprint, and I got ahead a little bit, but then it felt like Azure slowly started, I think, just making it easier to use and maybe working with companies to make their platform a little bit more accessible overall. And then I feel like that gap has been drastically closing over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I would credit a lot of that probably to folks like Donovan Brown and Abel, who were able to bring a lot of that information to the users of here's how you can actually do DevOps, or here's how you implement DevOps. And even though they did it from I would say a generic perspective, they talked about, you don't necessarily need to use a certain tool. You can mix the tools together, but they still brought it with the whole sense of hey, any platform, any tool, it's just a matter of, can you get your automation together? Do you have a nice, continual delivery and continual automation kind of system going on?
Yeah. Interesting. And here's a link at the bottom to talk to Microsoft Azure consultants, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. And can you share a little bit about kind of your team in particular and kind of what your role looks like?
Yeah. So I'm part of the DevOps and DevSecOps practice. And what we mainly focus on is a couple of different things. We help clients either, automate some of their processes on Azure, learn more about DevOps and what that really means. We offer a foundational workshop to help clients, identify potential workloads that would be fitting pretty good into that whole DevOps lifecycle. And then a lot of monitoring. So it's one of the things I did heavily before coming to 3Cloud was monitoring, automation, and just tying those all together.
Yeah, it's always kind of interesting talking about DevOps and hearing what companies think that means and what that means to different companies, right? And I've always thought of it as there's kind of it's almost like the deployment, monitoring, and almost like load balancing stuff that you might put all in the kind of one bucket. And then some people think of DevOps as building internal tools for our engineers, and then some companies kind of blend those together, right? So it's always interesting hearing what does this mean to you, right? Versus what it might mean to another company.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the weird thing. So like I said, I did join them back in February. And I actually did a count of how many clients I've been with now since then. I've been with about 35 different clients
Wow.
on some engagements where it's like, 2 days, like a 2-day workshop. And then some of them have been like, a few months long. And you're right. Each one of them have their own perspective of what DevOps is and what it means to them. And what I've recently been doing a lot more of is Azure data. Let's see, it's called ADAP. So it's Azure Data. I forgot what the other A stands for, but platform, adopting platform maybe, or adopt to data Azure platform. I don't know, something like that. But it's essentially helping clients or customers who are, in that whole data space, either Databricks, Azure Synapse, or something like that. One of those big data, systems. Get their CI/CD and DevOps on. Bring that to them too. And to them, that means something completely different. And I'm not talking like data ops. So that's a whole separate thing, but just DevOps in general, just being able to automate the changes of their database schemas or something like that. And, deploying that continually to the lower environments and, doing a good successful build and things like that. And to them, that means something completely different when you say like, hey, we're going to show you to do, DevOps style practices. So CI/CD kind of things.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Can you share a little bit about what your pathway into technology was? Did you go to the traditional computer science route, or is it more self-taught and something in between?
No. So actually, I was an ops guy. So I went to college, study for computer networking, take a part-time job working for Sears, just doing accounts payable. And while I was doing accounts payable, I wrote my first macro on Excel.
Sure.
So VBA. Yeah, VBA, and then just automated my job there, which turned into, hey, we should put together a little business around that. So that became the whole automation route. Nice. Started doing that and just continued to do more and more automation. Went into, from there, started doing more Python, C#, stuff like that, and just fell in love with that side of it. So I was on an ops. I mean, I have an A+ certification. I got that. And so I was on a whole like ops course and then veered off into software and just, I've loved it since then. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's interesting because when I used to recruit for DevOps roles back in the day, there was kind of like two different, or I felt like the traditional, maybe old school mindset of like ops was like, oh, someone who had a networking background or a systems background and then picked up some scripting and then started coding. And then they like had this knowledge base that most people didn't have, right? They could do enough like coding that they needed to like actually be able to work with systems and build custom software when needed. But then they also understood the actual ops and the network side, right? Which like a lot of the devs are like, we got someone who handles that, right? It seems like now you see more people specifically trying to go into that coming out of like a computer science background, but it's interesting because I feel like there is a lot of knowledge, right, that you probably have from years of working in that space of like not specifically always doing software development, but understanding kind of how the system works as a whole, right?
Yeah. That tribal knowledge there, you can't get past it. I mean, some of the experiences at Coyote in the earlier days where it was like, we had to actually do nitty gritty things.
Sure.
I remember one time we ordered we ordered a server that it was for a security team. It was racked, mounted, up and running. The security team took it for a test ride, realized that wasn't something that they wanted long-term. And that wasn't part of their plan. So, on the dev side, we were like, hey, that hardware is sitting there. We can reutilize that hardware for our Elastic cluster.
Sure.
So, that became our Elastic server. And we knew we knew where it was mounted at and racked at, which rack in the data center was on and everything like that. So just became our hardware.
There you go. Yeah, that's great. I mean, just being able to have that knowledge, right? Like that could be ours now, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I usually ask people kind of what their first job in the engineering world was, but it sounds like it's kind of unique for you, right? You kind of help create a role for yourself within Sears of you started to gain some of these technical skills. You had some of that background and then they kind of built built a role around you there?
Yeah, so they built the role around me, and then we cloned me, and we spread that out across the country, that same role.
Yeah.
And it ended up being like 5 or 6 of us across the country doing that exact same thing. A little bit of shadow IT, but also at the same time, your traditional IT. And then from there, I moved on into the corporate office and took on your traditional like BI manager. So this was in 2012, 2011. Sure. So what a BI manager then, it's not the same thing now. Had a couple of reporting analysts reporting to me and just, managing data, understanding the executive reports of what they want to see and those kind of things. These days it's more about data intelligence, right?
Yeah.
So, a lot of meetings, traditional corporate things. So an opportunity arose to come to Coyote and join them and start up an automation group there using some RPA technology, and just seized that opportunity, went and joined them.
Yeah, that's great. And then can you just talk a little bit about kind of moving internally? I mean, both those companies sound like places you moved internally and were with them for a number of years, right? I think that's something that you see software engineer tenure is pretty short at a lot of companies nowadays, right? And I think that's, I don't know, there's some advantages to that, but maybe not for the company, right? Some advantages to the individual. So can you just speak to that and kind of that decision and how you were able to move around internally?
Yeah. So, a lot of it is all about keeping open communications with your manager and stuff like that. So when I was at Sears, like I said, I moved around internally and I got recognized by like one of our VPs was like, oh, hey, that's great. Can you do that here as well? And so that kind of started that whole idea. But, later as I moved around, I think I stayed there in that same role for about 5 or 6 years. And the person who originally hired me had moved into the corporate office and mentioned that this role was coming up and opening up, and thought it'd be good if I applied. It wasn't reporting to her, but she knew about the role in general. And she was like, hey, that seems like a great next step for your career. Yeah. So I moved into that role. Moving to Coyote, I played Xbox with one of their CTOs.
There you go.
I mean, I think it's the greatest story of like how you actually got recruited. I played Xbox with one of their CTOs. We knew each other from going to the SQL Saturday conferences, which was a big thing back then. They're not around anymore. But, just big single day knowledge share sessions, talk with people. And then as we played more and more Xbox together, we realized like, hey, actually, I do a lot of the same things in common. And so, he said, hey, I know that this is coming up. It's not part of my group, but they're actually recruiting for it actively. So I applied. I went in and I met with, actually her title was a CTO as well. So weird startup thing, I guess. They had 3 CTOs or 3 CIOs or something like that. But so I ended up joining them. She thought I would be a great fit for her team, and I ended up joining them. And I think after a few years there, when we moved under a different VP, I took on their Salesforce system because they had acquired another 2 companies, and coming from Sears, I already had experience with Salesforce. Yeah. So helped them transition that into Coyote's TMS and brokering software system. Once we sunset that, then we just kept that whole, technical analyst role going on. And then that turned into being more of a developer advocate. So since I understood all the developer things, their needs, their educational needs, all of Coyote's technologies, it just blended together to be a good fit.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about, I think people hear that term developer advocate a lot now, but don't necessarily know what that looks like, right? And I think it also means something different depending on if you're maybe externally facing at a company or maybe internally facing, right?
Yeah. So this was so Coyote actually ran theirs as your traditional internal facing role. And so what that meant was my developers that I was advocating for and trying to educate were the internal developers. So part of it was like onboarding new developers, making them fit into the culture, helping them find, buddies or, mentors, if they were introverts or something like that. Educating some of our customers. I think I ended up having to work with two of our customers, working with our other partners as well. The customer side of it was mainly focused on these customers were using already an existing set of APIs. They just needed someone to have as a point of contact to be able to go for assistance and talk to. So just working with those folks and just making them fit in. So that would be your traditional developer advocacy things there. And then getting onto the community. So, which is how I met you.
Yeah.
So Coyote was part of, the supply chain technology group or something like that. And I think I met you at one of their events.
Yeah. A freight tech meetup.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. People in Chicago, if you're not in the freight tech world or aren't aware, right? It's huge in Chicago. Coyote being a very large player, but there's a whole slew of companies that are either in the logistics space, the third-party logistics space, and then from that has become, I don't know, probably a million different software solutions that are trying to help that. Right.
I saw a map a few weeks ago of it, and I remember. So when I joined Coyote, it was like Coyote was cutting edge.
Yeah,
and they were forward thinking. They were. It's your freight business. You go, freight, but they operated like a software company. Like, you have your traditional sales group, and then from there, how you treat your software developers was just like your traditional software company.
Yeah.
And now when you look at what Coyote started, we'll call them they weren't the OG of it, but they were the next generation. And I think the next generation of those companies now, if you see what they're doing technology wise, it's like they've built onto it, and it's cool stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of machine learning, a lot of just self-solving solutions. It's just some cool stuff out there now.
Absolutely. I built, a whole recruiting career out of the freight tech world. So I think there's a really interesting graphic. I think it was American Backhaulers was kind of the OGs. And then from that was 4 founders that basically went off they basically found Coyote and then a whole slew of other companies. And it's really interesting seeing this tree of how it kind of splinters out. And it's a huge part of the tech landscape in Chicago now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, that would be an interesting graph to see where all the actual folks went to. Like you have Bill Drager, who went to Uber Freight, which was Uber wasn't even in that business. And now look at them. You have, let's see, Mick Yari. She's at another logistics firm now doing the same thing. She was one of their many CIO strategy VPs. Mm-hmm. You have Jeff Silver, of course, who started now just a software company.
Right.
Like a real no, it's Mastery.
Mastery. Oh, I'm thinking. Thinking of the other Silver brother. I think.
So that would be Matt. So Jeff is the dad.
Yeah, I got it.
Yep.
Got it.
So Matt, and then so Matt Silver, started Forger. So and there's some Coyotes that went there too. I don't know who's really behind their tech. I've seen their load board system.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's on par with everyone else.
Yeah. All right. Try not to get sued.
Yeah. It looks nice. It looks pretty. But then when you look at some of the other, just in general, that whole tech thing, look what Redwood's doing.
Yeah.
Where they're turning the logistics thing into a platform. So it's great story. I have twin little brothers. Mm-hmm. Sorry, sidetrack it real quick. I have twin little brothers, and one of them, he's in the Army Reserve. Mm-hmm. And so he has a commercial driver's license. And so he figured it's a good mixture of just driving trucks while, between, serving his country.
Yeah.
And so he's got 2 trucks, and he was texting with me, and he's like, yeah, I'm running loads for, this, I don't know. Can I say company names?
Sure. Okay? Yeah, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So he's just got his own okay. He's just running freight for Amazon just from their distribution centers between Southern Illinois up to Northern Illinois. Mm-hmm. So it's just super simple stuff. And then he's like, but I want to do more, and I don't know what to do. And so I have all this experience and knowledge, and I'm just like, who would I send my brother to?
Yeah.
And I thought about it, and I'm like, well, the technology is so cool there. As an owner operator, why don't you just go ahead and make it go like go on a load board and just book your own loads? You
Yeah.
don't need anybody anymore. And so like I wrote him a little PowerShell script. It pulls like where he's at, and then it hits Redwood stuff, pulls back some locations for him that has like loads available. Just super simple stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
it's so
That's great.
cool. Yeah. So technology in general, logistics industry, amazing. I just look forward to the next generation now, where they're going to go with these things.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, how did you land in this most recent role here at 3Cloud?
Yeah, so Coyote did some reshuffling around. They did some layoffs. I guess like a lot of companies didn't know what to expect in the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I think they let go from the article I saw was like 300 something people across the board. I don't know exactly how many of those were IT, but I know at least at least 15 people from IT.
Yeah.
And so that opened me up. At the same time, I was already talking with some of the other companies about possibly joining them.
Mhm.
So I think I got laid off on a Friday, and I accepted an offer to join these folks on a Wednesday of the following week.
There you go.
So it went pretty quickly.
It's a little
it went
easier
pretty
during a
quickly.
pandemic, right? A little less
Yeah, and this
stress.
was right at the beginning. Yeah, so and those first few days, don't do anything crazy. Don't
Sure.
go like post anything crazy online.
Yeah.
Just, turn off your computer, relax,
Yeah.
breathe, and then like, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? So I was still friends with my boss from Coyote, who gave me some great advice that helped me figure out what I wanted to do next. So I really do enjoy doing that whole developer advocacy thing. And I love teaching people. And I really enjoy the whole consulting side of what I was doing. And so it's a good mixture for me. I really enjoy spending time with different people, educating them on different things like Git strategy, just basic stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
Just that aha moment. So, working with the clients, 3Cloud, it's just amazing.
Yeah, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. I was kind of curious about that transition, but if you think about it, developer advocacy and consulting roles, as long as it's like a true consultant rather than you're just going to be handed projects and expected to do all the work and hand it back, right? Like an actual consultant role, there's an education quality to it, right? And you get to interact with people still. It's a little different than the 40 hours a week of punching a clock, handling tickets, right, and just sending them off.
Yeah, I mean, I do speaking engagements. Technically, I do 3 to 4 speaking engagements a week with PowerPoint decks and everything like that.
Wow.
So I think the only I can say I'm reusing is the front slide, which is our company, and the last slide, which is our thank you slide.
Yeah.
But everything in between, like I'm making new decks for each client and presenting it to them. Either I'm presenting work that I've done or a potential solution for them. Mm-hmm. And it's just, Azure is such a monster to be on a platform wise. I mean, there's so many technologies. And I keep telling our solutions folks like, hey, if we come across a client that wants to use Azure Orbit, that whole like satellite thing, I'm in.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will totally do that. That sounds so cool. Just imagine doing that with DevOps too.
Yeah. Interesting. That's great. So have you done technical interviews lately, either internally or for your team or anything like that?
No, actually. So a lot of our technical interviews for our team are actually done by our practice director. And then we do a couple other folks outside of that.
Yeah.
So now that our team's grown so much though, his plans to go ahead and expand that out to some of the senior people on the team to do the interviews with them, which I think is a great idea. Our team now, when I joined, our team was 5 and we just hit 11 people.
Wow.
But we have like roles open for another 4 or 5 acquisitions right now. So, I mean, we're growing.
It's a lot of time spent on hiring, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, one person doing all those interviews is pretty insane.
Yeah. Were you involved in that process at Coyote in the past?
Yeah, so I did like for Coyote, some of the more of the personality style interviews, not as much as the technical chops, because by then we already know they get the technical chops. It's
Yeah.
just like where would they fit in good at?
Yeah. So what are you typically evaluating for when you're interviewing someone?
So the last roles was mainly focused around like folks who would be good for like our dev team or the robotic process automation team there. Mainly, let's see, do they understand the technologies? Do they understand a gist of what we do as a business? Um, More of where would they fit in, kind of personality wise?
Yeah.
Are they introverts, extroverts? Are they new, not new, to this
Sure.
whole whatever role they're coming into? So, and you do see that, like, you see people who may transition from a service desk role over to like wanting to be an entry level engineer, software engineer.
Yeah.
So that could be a big jump there, depending on their experience or their knowledge. So you can't really judge them all by like, do they have a college background in this or not? So it's more of like, hey, why do you want to do this? And tell me about it.
Yeah.
What makes you interested in this role?
Yeah, and it sounds like you're someone who enjoys constantly learning and kind of acquiring that knowledge, like you mentioned, right? If we have a chance to use this technology at your current job, like you want to be the person to do that, right? Is that something that you're looking for in interviewers? I guess are there skill sets in particular or mindsets you're looking for?
Yeah, so we're looking for those same kind of things like that. A quest for knowledge. The weirdest thing about being in DevOps is it's never going to be the same.
Sure.
It's always continual improvement. So technologies are changing. So you always got to stay ahead and learn, keep learning. It's just, do they have a quest and thirst for that? Want to keep learning, or are they going to be like, cool, I'm in, I'm good. I'll just keep doing the same way, same thing, like you said, like in a factory, just, keep punching out the same things.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because it to some extent, it's exhausting sometimes to keep learning, keep trying new things, but that is the job, right? At the end of the day, like things are going to change. Like HTML is probably always going to be around, right? But so you see, even within that world, right? There's, now we're using components within HTML using slightly different technology, and we got to figure out how to handle that, right? Like it's the same type of thing, the same framework, right? But you're doing it in drastically different ways, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's it keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
I guess you could say the knowledge is really a CI/CD pipeline, right? So it's just that whole infinity loop.
Sure.
So you learn something, you do something, you learn something new.
I love it. How do you think in the past you've done technical interviews when you were interviewing?
So I'm trying to think back to the last technical interview when I was at Coyote. So there's two parts to it. It was a technical part where I asked the person technical questions, and then from there gave them some a sample project to work on, and then see what they could produce from that, and give them a time of like, hey, an hour. Nothing related to our business, but just enough to see, can they use their technical skills to complete the task?
Yeah.
And so once they completed the task, or, they thought they were complete with the task, then talk with them about it. Like, what was their thinking into it? Why did they do things a certain way? What didn't they think about? That kind of stuff. Or now that they've done it and they've talked through it, what would they do different?
Sure. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And on the other side of the table, like when you were in a position where you were interviewing for roles, how do you feel about technical interviews? Like, do you love them, hate them, somewhere in between?
So, as you said earlier, the hottest thing right now on the market is DevOps skills. So, I posted on LinkedIn after leaving Coyote that I wasn't there anymore and I was looking for a new opportunity. And I said what I wanted to do. And I posted 10 cities that I was interested in. My wife and I are not we're not geographically bounded. Sure. So I posted 10 cities, and it was just like, I got I think I did 79 interviews in 2 weeks.
Wow.
So even though I knew who I wanted to go work for already, and I had, I was doing my interview process with them, I still kept interviewing because you don't know for sure.
Sure.
And I had 79 interviews in 2 weeks, and it was so busy that I actually ended up I learned about Calendly to schedule so I would just send the recruiters my link, like, hey, here's it. You could see like time available for me. And I think they say finding a job is like a full-time job.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's true. From 8 a.m. until about 1 p.m., I was interviewing every day, like back to back.
Yeah.
Hour to hour and a half interviews with folks. And then the rest of the day I spent on building my knowledge. So working on my certifications, like Azure certifications, and just like cranking through that too, because I had free time. So those interviews though, during that time were all over the board. So Of course, usually the HR ones, your first technical recruiter interview ones, those are easy peasy. Those are just like, hey, does this guy know, like, does he meet what's on the paper?
Yep.
Yes. That's easy. The next interview, those ones range, and those become everything from, I interviewed with one competitor to Coyote, and I won't say their name, but that was the only interview where at the end of the interview, I said, I don't think we're going to be a good match.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was mainly because the questions they were asking me, it was around Azure, but it wasn't like they were interviewing me to see if I would be a good fit for their company or if I had the technical knowledge. I felt like they were harvesting information from me.
Oh, interesting.
Like, how did you do this at Coyote? And then I never answered those questions. Like, I would say, like, I can't tell you how to do that, but I will tell you, here's a way that I would do it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if you have that as a problem, like, here's what you could do to solve that problem. I mean, I even did a whiteboarding session with them where, trying to remember, we were doing microservices. And so I did a whiteboarding session with them where I designed for them how to do some monitoring around a set of microservices. And I offered them like 4 different solutions for that. And they were like, oh, great. Well, what would the cost be? And I'm like, well, I don't feel like that's a question really you should be asking me. That's probably like a question you should be asking a salesperson.
Yeah.
So, and by then I kind of realized, like, I don't really like these people. Like, yeah, it was a senior role there. So, I mean, I would expect that from a senior role, but I still didn't think, I think they saw me as a coyote that they could get versus,
Sure.
And that's not what I was really about. But yeah, no, it ranged. It depends on interviewing during COVID times is a little bit different.
Yeah.
So I think I did 3 on-site interviews. A lot of whiteboarding over my screen shares. So I have a Surface Pro, so it's easy to draw on.
There you go. That helps a lot, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I think there was one retailer that I worked with, and I ended with the interview of, I don't think I'm the right person for you, but I think I know someone who would be. And actually my friend went to go work there.
Oh, wow.
Which was a perfect fit for them. So even like a little like, hey, this may be better for you than B. And I told them like, hey, actually, I think they said they didn't think I was a good fit, but I was like, yeah, and I agree with you. And I think this person may be a better fit for what you're looking for, which worked out really well. And then the other companies I interviewed were the software companies, traditional software companies, all great companies, all winners. Yeah. So
nice.
But
so you felt like the interviews went from, some of them pretty straightforward and things you'd expect, and then some of them kind of out of left field, but all good companies overall, like no like major concerns other than maybe that one company.
Yeah, just that one company. And like, I don't know where they're going to be long term.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
So
yeah. Well, there's almost and very aware of this, having been a recruiter in the past, when like if there's layoffs or anything, especially if there's competitors who know about those, there's almost like this shark in the water type of thing where you're like, oh, like we can like get some of these people and get that mind share from like our competitor right away. Like I made a mistake very early in my recruiting career where like I sent a message to someone who I like, some company had done some layoffs, right? And like I had been reaching out to people at those companies, and I was not very, this is, months into my recruiting career, I was not very tactful. And I think I was just like, hey, heard there was layoffs, I have some jobs, right? Like not very aware of the fact of like, oh, it's a person on the other end of this message, right, who's probably going through like some shit because they just got laid off, right? And the person thankfully was really nice and said like, hey, I wasn't impacted, but you should maybe be a little bit more aware of your messaging. Like there are people I know who got laid off here, and this is not a happy, like they would probably be upset if they saw your message, right? Rather than thinking, oh, great, you have jobs for me, right? Because you're not exactly doing it in the most thoughtful way. And I was like, oh, thank you for that. Because yes, I was, 22 and very ignorant of how that can impact your life and your family and everything. But also helped me like recognize going forward, like, okay, yes, there is like some opportunity to help people in these situations. But if you give off this like shark coming after a fresh meat type of vibe when you're doing that, like people are going to sense that a mile away, right? And maybe that company had a little bit of that, right?
Yeah, I think that may have been some of their situation there. I do know that they were just beginning their, internal growth. They are Microsoft customers as well. They are not 3Cloud customers. I'll say that much. They are not our customers. But no, I think their long-term strategy or their short-term strategy at that time, I think it's hopefully in a better situation for them. But the other companies, though, like just interviewing with them, they were more about, wow, this person has all this knowledge and can use these skills, and is it a good fit? Kind of questions.
Yeah.
I think I did each company at least one technical interview, and it was a demo of either let's see, some of them were for DevOps roles. So it was like, can you write some PowerShell and Python for us and move some files around?
Yeah.
And just did that for them in a browser. I did one coding test for a company, and it was like, can you write code? And I was like, no, but I'll do it anyway. Let's try this.
Sure.
And, like, I don't consider myself to be a code writer. Like if someone said like, do you write code? I would always say no, because I understand it. Like if I see something on the screen and I know that there's an error there, like I can figure out how to fix it. If I needed to like automate something at home, I could do that.
Yeah.
Like, but I wouldn't consider myself to be a code writer. Like I'm just a problem solver.
Sure.
So yeah. And I did actually pretty good on that one. Like it was like, hey, go fix this, and like, can you write this to do something with this? And it was like, yeah, it may not be the approach that your traditional like software engineer would have taken, but I did it. So there you go. The questions I was asked by 3Cloud were around choices and technologies. So the interview with them, I believe I interviewed with 7 people. So I did an interview with a technical recruiter, interviewed with my boss, and he just asked a bunch of questions. My boss is located in another state, so he asked a bunch of questions. I did a on-site interview to their office where I met with my boss's boss, and we talked a lot about consulting and philosophy around consulting. And he wanted to just really see if I understood what I was doing and how everything worked. And because they don't usually hire folks who are not consultants, so it was very different for them at the time. But he did see the correlation, between being a developer advocate, the type of work I was doing, traveling, meeting with all kinds of clients, meeting with potential employees, and things like that, and how they work. So he found a good correlation there. My technical interviews were with folks who were on the infrastructure side, and one person from my group. And those questions were mainly around different Azure technologies, how I would apply them, how I solve for problems with them. So a lot of questions around things you would find on like the Azure certification test.
Yeah.
Which were actually kind of worked out well because I had been studying for those things. So I kind of knew everything around it, the core concepts. I think there was one that I wasn't as familiar with, and that was it was like in the security products from Azure. And that's mainly because like I never had to do any of that stuff.
Yeah,
so,
it's a little bit of a different world,
logging.
Right?
Yeah. So, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not really familiar with it, but I know where to Google it. And he actually thought that was a good answer. So, I mean, if you don't know, I can go figure that out. Like, and plus the likelihood of I actually ran into it at the time was rare. Now I do it a lot though.
Yeah, sure. Well, like you said, Azure is a beast, right? There's a lot going on the platform. So you can't know everything, right?
Right.
And I think often the goal of the interview too is like, see how far can we push, like, how broad is this person's knowledge, and then kind of figure out where the edges are, and then like how deep is their knowledge in the area that they do have, right? So it's like, do you know this? If you don't, that's fine, right? Then we'll move on to stuff that you do know well, and then try to go deep within that world, right? Or at least hopefully that's what good interviews look like, right?
Yeah.
Do you actually
the weird part is in our company we have a DevOps community, where we do knowledge sharing and education inside, and I run the ops community. So it seems to be like I focus more on the operations aspects of things around, DevOps, versus the dev side of things internally. So I'm educating all of our new hires, bringing them new things every month from Azure operations, and introduce them to other third-party tools like Datadog, New Relic, App Dynamics, just like solutions that work really well with Azure.
Yeah, that's great. Can you just share a little bit more about that? Because I think some companies have something formal like that in place, and then a lot of companies maybe not as much. Can you just share a little bit about what that looks like functionally at your company?
Yeah, so our company, we're broken up into a couple of things. So we're broken up first by what's called practices. So the practice that I'm part of is our app DevOps practice. Which means like folks consultants who are app dev or DevOps, they all fall under the same practice. And then inside those practices, we usually have different communities. So we have like Kubernetes, we have, IoT, we have app dev, then we have DevSecOps community. And then there's another practice that's like the operations community. So my journey when I joined 3Cloud, the first client I went on was it was a DevOps project. The second client I joined on was what's called an Azure landing zone. And that is a heavy operations project where clients are moving to Azure for the first time. And so you're building out everything new, network, infrastructure, and since coming from a DevOps perspective to do this kind of project, I picked it up really quickly. And so that just became like more and more. I ended up doing more and more of those, like helping clients on the operations side for like the first 6 months. And the practice director there needed someone to co-run their community with a lot of knowledge around monitoring systems. And so he asked me to do it. So it's a little like, I'm not in my area, but I'm in another area, but I'm running it. We're doing really good. I think we have about 30 members. So people who actually may not necessarily be in that ops group, but they want to learn more about it, who are actively attending things. And that kind of ties into my community that I run outside of work, which is the Chicago Monitoring Enthusiast Group.
Yeah. Could you share a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so the Chicago Monitoring Enthusiast Group is it's a group of folks who just use different monitoring tools from all around Chicago. I should probably change the name to Chicagoland because I don't go to Chicago anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So Chicagoland or Chicago greater area. But it's just it's chicagomonitoring.com, and it'll take people straight to our user group. I don't know if we're going to stay on Meetup long term, or if we may move to another platform, but usually we just go off the URL. We talk about Amazon Web Services and monitoring around those tools. We talk about monitoring things on-prem. We talk about monitoring things on private clouds like Oracle infrastructure or something like that, or monitoring stuff in your house. Just,
interesting.
Yeah, it's enthusiasts really. So you get a mixture of everyone.
Sure, that's awesome. As far as technical interviews, do you have any tips for folks that you would want to share? Maybe people who are going into technical interviews or just interviews in general. If they have, what'd you say, 78 interviews in the next 2 weeks that are booked?
Yeah. First things first, know what you're interviewing for. So, I mean, each company is different. Understanding fully what they're looking for is very key. If you go do your research on Google, not about the company, but about the people who work at the company. That is really helpful. So one of the companies I interviewed with, the job description just had the title in it and it had some basic information about their company. And so I just went on LinkedIn, looked at the company, looked for people who had that same role, and just looked at their experience to see what they do there, what they talk about. Some people talk about projects, some people talk about different technologies. And so just understanding fully what is expected or what you possibly could be doing in that role and what kind of technologies you may be using.
Yeah.
I think you see more companies these days do list the technologies on there, or fairly close to the names of the technologies. There's some that may be the names may have changed 3 times, but the technical person or HR person may not know the names of it.
Sure.
But just the idea. So
yeah.
Another thing is come with your questions. If you're concerned about you don't really like to do something, be upfront about that. Hey, I am really good at automating these processes, but I'm really bad at doing these things. So I'm trying to think of something that I would say I really don't like writing code. I can do it, but I really don't want to have to. So if something's not going to work when we go to deploy, I'm going to say your code doesn't work.
Yeah.
I'm not going to fix your code for you. So, just, being upfront about those kind of things like that. Or if you're shy and you don't like to write, white papers or documentation, or you love to write white papers and documentation, then say that, opposed to you'd rather not have to do a presentation for something.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense, being upfront about what your actual, one, what your skill set is, but 2, your interests, right? I think that's also what sets you up for success long term, rather than, you get put in a role where you're doing a bunch of things that you don't actually enjoy, right?
Yeah. I also try to do, when I'm interviewing people, to find out about them personally. For me, I'm really passionate about my home automation. So I usually talk about that. And I don't just all of a sudden just start talking about it. It's more so what do you like to do outside of work? Do you do any kind of cool things at home? I love my Plex server.
Sure.
I love on my Unraid server, things like that. And then that usually opens them up just to see are they thinking about those things? Do they do these? Is this a passion of theirs?
Yeah.
Is technology a passion for them, or is this just a job? And I'm not saying that sways me when I'm interviewing a person, but it's more of kind of making them feel more comfortable. Tell me about yourself.
Yeah.
Kind of question.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard too, because sometimes if you don't ask those types of questions, you don't know. And you just don't get a great signal from someone if they don't necessarily offer it either. And I had a client had a good example of this in the past. There was a candidate that they were interviewing and said like it was a pretty stale conversation, and it was a recruiter screen, so a lot of those are pretty, straightforward. And the person was kind of on the edge of if they thought they would be a good fit or not. And then they asked them like, what are you interested in, or like what do you do for fun? And he said all of a sudden the candidate went from talking like kind of just, obviously spitting out HR answers that the HR person was looking for, to talking about how they love organizing music festivals. They're like, oh, I've organized 3 small music festivals in the last 2 years. And then the person was like, I would have no idea. But then we talked for an extra half hour about music festivals, right? And like has nothing to do with engineering, but all of a sudden this person who I was talking to actually made an impression. And they told me about these 3 websites that they built to organize these festivals, right? Which is a whole different, like, obviously I'm going to mark that versus like, this person was okay, didn't have a lot of great answers, just kind of middle of the road, right? So actually trying to figure that stuff out goes a long way.
That actually makes me think of like, so our technical recruiter, when I joined 3Cloud, we only had one, and he was doing all the technical interviews. Sorry, all of the initial like interviews with folks. And he's so good at getting you to open up and talk about those kind of things that I think, so my first day in the office was the last day that our office was open pre-COVID. Sure. So I went 526 days without actually going to the office. And then when I finally saw him again, I was like, oh my gosh, we have so much to catch up on. We talked about, our fame. We have a lot of shared common interest. I live in Kane County. So I live at the northern part of Kane County. He lives at the southern part. So we're both in this rural community kind of situation where we have like 2 cops in our town, like stuff like that. So we talked about our passions and interest in like dogs, kids, horses in the neighborhood, cattle, those kind of things. And it's just like, wow, like you don't really connect that well with people unless you're really good at, the Ford. You ever heard of that? Fording people?
No.
Ford technique. So if you're looking for something to ever talk with someone about, you talk with them about, you can trigger something from them to get them to talk by asking them 4 questions about family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. So if you ask them one of those 4 questions, that usually opens them up to be able to give you more information. So I think the best recruiters and technical recruiters will usually come with you with those. And as a person interviewing, if you come back at them with those questions right there and you turn the interview around on it, it becomes really helpful.
Yeah. I'm writing this down. This is great. I've heard this once you said that, I was like, oh, I've heard this in the past, but I think often I'm in a spot where I'm like, I tell people I don't really like small talk all that much. I like big talk, right? Like, let's talk about something that's actually like interesting, right? Rather than just how's the weather, right? And I think that stuff actually drives to something more interesting and substantial than, it's been warm, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Do you have any different advice for early career engineers, or would it be the same advice?
I do. I mean, I would say a lot of it is like you mentioned that one person who's involved in music festivals. Find something that you're passionate about and actually capitalize on that to help subsidize some of those career skills you may have.
Sure.
Earlier in my career, when the question was like, hey, do you have management experience? Yes, I do. I volunteer with a non-for-profit where I run an organization that has over 2,000 members.
Yeah.
And all 2,000 members reported to me. So yes, I do. I managed a budget or a festival, that was a multi-$1,000 project or $1 million budget across the state or something like that. So never, underestimate the opportunity to volunteer and help someone else do something good that could subsidize some of those skills for you. I'm pretty sure everybody knows a group that could use a website if you're a web developer or an app, just a small app to help them out in their office. If you're an app developer, and it doesn't take much time. Plus, those skills already.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's a company, I believe they're based out of Chicago still, called the Difference Engine. And their whole goal is basically helping create websites and applications for nonprofits. And I
Yeah.
think they take, when I was working with them, they were boot camp graduates would basically do their like a little apprenticeship with them and help kind of build websites. And then they had something real to show, right? Like this is an actual thing I built that's live, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And that's something you can do on your own, right? You don't need a whole company to help you do that. Like if you live nearby an animal shelter and you know their website was built in 1980, right? You could go and say like, hey, I can make something nice in, a week and a half, and we can sped it up. Like, and that's something you can talk and care about, right?
Yep. Or a church or Boy Scout group or
yeah.
If you're adventurous enough, go visit your local city hall and see what they need help with. So
absolutely. Great. Well, before we wrap up, any other tips, anything else to share, or I always ask people, maybe for folks to relate to and know that it's not the end of the world if they have a bad interview. Any interviewing horror stories you're willing to share?
Let's see. Interviewing, I try to block the bad ones out.
Sure.
So I gotta really search now for a bad one. I'm assuming one of those 79 there was definitely a bad one in there that I know. Yeah, man, that's a hard question there. I'll have to, I really don't know a bad one now. So now if I find a bad one, I'll definitely post it to LinkedIn.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hey, well, that's
and then I'll go back and read that.
A good place to be. I mean, maybe the horror story is having to do 79 interviews in a couple of weeks, right? That's while studying for certifications too. Right?
Yeah. And I started writing a blog post about this. So I got to mention this. This is a key part to it. And I think I figured out the formula to the reason why I got so many interviews so quickly was because the way my resume was designed. And I didn't know for sure if it was a formula or not, but my friend was unemployed for a year and a half. She was like a utility worker for a utility service provider. And she had gotten fired. So she was, we were talking about her resume, and she's like, I said, send me your resume. Let's take a look at it. And I looked at her resume and I applied the same formula to her resume that I applied to mine. So I know my formula actually works. She ended up getting like 5 interviews within a week after posting her new resume that I had helped her fix. And it's not something that I came up with, by the way. I do my research before I even started doing my resume. But I mean, we know technology, and as recruiters, they have to go out and find tons and tons of people. So they're looking for keywords in the resume. So the key part is when you're doing your resume, you put those keywords into it that for the roles that you're interested in. So if the role that you're interested in, we'll say like it's a developer advocate role, or I'm sorry, a software developer role, and you use certain technologies, like they're looking for someone who does React, Node.js, SQL, and then like we'll see like one of the big 3 cloud providers like Google or something like that.
Yeah.
Make sure you have those in your resume.
Right.
That you have experience with it. Or even, I mean, like if you don't have experience with it, don't say that you have experience with it. But if you can, identify how what they're looking for is related to something that you've done in the past, that's going to be very key. Like it will open up doors for you left and right.
Yeah.
I did have 79 interviews, but I probably applied to like 200 companies.
Sure.
So, I mean, the keyword tracking is definitely key to it to get you through that first round. And then when you're actually doing your first interview, a personality, like can't be quiet and shy.
Sure.
So
sure. Well, you can. It's harder, right? Like it's going to be harder to make an impression. And then, like I was talking about that example with the music festival, that person was probably going to go into a maybe bucket. And at the end of the day, the maybe bucket at most companies is actually a no bucket, right? Like it's only if we get through all the yeses and they don't work out, then we might go back to the maybes, right? So I think making an impression is I mean, you mentioned earlier, like saying something you're passionate about or sharing some passion. When I was recruiting and hiring for recruiting roles, I used to ask people those types of questions. And sometimes people would tell me what their passion was. And I would go, okay, well, that's not like going to be like what you're interested in, what you want to do is not what we're offering. Right. But I'm very glad that we both know this, 25 minutes into this call instead of 6 months into you working here. Right. So like, I guess if someone desperately needed a job, maybe, you got to do what you got to do. But if you already have a job and you can kind of be in a position where you're a little bit more selective, like actually sharing that and being fine with the company going, oh yeah, that's not, we're not able to offer any of that. It's going to save you a lot of grief in the long term run, right?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. I did do an interview with a company and I told them my salary requirement and they told me I was outside of their range.
Yeah.
A week later, the recruiter followed up with me and said that she had talked with, she enjoyed her interview so much that she had talked with their leadership and they were able to meet my salary requirements. So that's a key part, like, being able to, fully explain things, what you do, what you're passionate about, what you're looking for. Recruiters will do their best to try to fulfill those requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I mean, can you plug 3Cloud, anything else that you want to get the word out about? Sounds like the user group in Chicago, Chicagoland.
I think I'm going to plug 3Cloud. So, I mean, if you're looking for a job in Chicagoland or actually anywhere in the United States, 3Cloud is definitely looking for more consultants. We just have a high demand of business, and our website is 3cloudsolutions.com.
Yeah.
On there. Or you could find me on LinkedIn. So I'm assuming you'll post my LinkedIn in the bottom somewhere.
Yeah.
So find me on LinkedIn, and I definitely have the most recent postings going on there, usually around app dev, infrastructure positions, DevOps roles, project manager roles, everything from, we'll say like maybe second year as a project manager role and up kind of experience. So not quite entry, but not quite a season, but we have everything in between and also seasoned professionals.
Yeah.
So yeah, great place to come, join, do your career thing. You'll love it. So
cool.
I'm trying to recruit you too, by the way.
Yeah.
Everybody's welcome.
I love it. Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been a blast.
Yeah. It was great catching up with you. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for watching the first half of the Professional Technical Interviewee. The technical interview will be released 1 week from this episode, so be sure to subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Taylor Dorsett or on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.